So, as many of you who watch this channel know, we cover a variety of topics. Now, we mainly focus on the dark and the spooky, such as true crime, internet mysteries, and ARGs, as well as a hub for my own original films. But I'm equally a fantasy and sci-fi nerd. Now, as a matter of fact, science fiction was indeed my first love growing up as a child. You know, things like Star Wars, The Twilight Zone, and Godzilla were amongst my earliest memories of cherished films and TV. And if you're anything like me, part of the allure of sci-fi was the unique and awesome way that it portrayed its villains. The villains of sci-fi are unlike any other genre. The villains of sci-fi are over-the-top maniacal, they're extraordinarily powerful and uniquely diabolical. What makes the villains of science fiction so special in my eyes anyway, is their propensity for the grandiose. They're often larger than life, sometimes even bordering on godlike in their scope. Now, unlike horror villains, the baddies of sci-fi go big or they go home, as the saying goes. They're not content with wreaking havoc on just a local scale. Their genocidal tyranny extends planetary, galactic, or even universal. So, what could be better than just one of these grandiose villains? Well, try an entire faction, order, or even empire full of them. That's what we're going to get into today, ladies and gentlemen. My top 10 villainous factions from science fiction. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. We start off our list with a contingent of galactic perfectionists. Now, admittedly, I'd never been a big fan of Star Trek. I've tried several times to get into the franchise, but it never really stuck with me. Now, that could be because I was never a fan of Gene Roddenberry himself. Every franchise connected with this man always failed to connect with me. Now, this isn't a dig at Gene Roddenberry. The man was a talented writer, and I can certainly see why his works have the kind of following that they do. But after trying to watch things like Star Trek, Andromeda, and Earth Final Conflict, and not really enjoying any of them, I came to the conclusion that I just didn't like the stories of Gene Roddenberry. Now, nothing against the guy himself, it's just that his output never really grabbed me. Particularly with Star Trek. Now, the ultra-optimistic outlook on the 21st century and the idea of a united human race under the control of a new globalist regime like the Federation just seemed a bit off-putting to me. If you know my politics, I am a conservative, so you probably know where I'm going with this. But at any rate, like I said, Star Trek just didn't do it for me. And that is except for the Borg. Now, this particular group of villains really grabbed me from the onset. They seemed thoroughly menacing and posed a true threat, not just to the crew of the Enterprise, but to the galaxy as a whole. Just the idea of being assimilated into a collective without dissenting thought or speech just seems particularly nightmarish to me. Where individualism and free speech or expression is seen as a sickness or a virus, hits very close to home for some reason. Almost like we've seen it in our own backyards. Oh, oops. How'd that get in there? Sorry about that. That darn conservative bug of mine. Anyway, the Borg first appeared in Star Trek: The Next Generation as a technologically superior race that seeks to assimilate all life in the galaxy into their one hive mind, known fundamentally enough as the Collective. Now, if nothing else, the Borg represent the real-life threat of collectivism and the pitfalls of a singular ideology. In fact, the Borg's most famous mantra is "resistance is futile." You may have heard of it. Now, at the center of the Borg hive mind is the Queen, to which all drones are subservient. Now, interestingly enough, the Borg are indiscriminate in which alien species they cultivate. They're made up of several different alien life forms, looking very different on the outside, but operating with a single objective on the inside. Now, one could almost say that diversity is their strength. However, singularity of mind is their goal. Sounds very, very familiar. Oops, sorry about that. Sorry, shoot, get out of here. That darn conservative bug again. But like I said, the Borg are fascinating and truly threatening villains. And that is in the realm of fiction, which is where I firmly hope that they stay. Now here's one of many throwbacks for you. As a kid who primarily grew up in the 90s, I was privy to an often forgotten little gem of sci-fi programming. At the time, the idea of parallel dimensions within the realms of fictional media wasn't one that was very often used, at least none that I saw. The show Sliders tells the story of quantum physics genius one Quinn Mallory, who unlocks the secret to traveling between alternate dimensions. Now, Sliders certainly wasn't the first one to come up with this concept. The idea of alternate universes goes back at least 150 years, with several authors tackling the concept in some sort of way. But as a teen having little exposure to this particular niche of sci-fi genre, this was all new to me, and furthermore, it was absolutely awesome. I absolutely loved it. The idea of traveling between universes by simply clicking a button on a little remote control-like device, I think it was called the timer, correct me if I'm wrong, that was extremely a gripping idea for me. I couldn't get enough of it. Now, each week, our group of sliders, which included Quinn, his physics professor Maximilian Arturo, on-again, off-again girlfriend Wade Wells, and all-American guy Rembrandt Brown, would leap into other universes of alternate history. Amongst their many adventures is a world where the United States has been taken over by communists. Stop that! Stop that! Moving on. A world where men can have damn, stop it! Psst. Psst. Sorry about that, guys. And a dimension where the atom bomb was never invented. Our protagonists are routinely encounter alternate doppelgangers of themselves, some with vastly different personalities and motivations to our main quartet. Now, throughout the first season, the show lacked any central antagonist. The villains mainly relegated to whatever threats they faced in each alternate universe they landed in. That is until season 2, where we're introduced to the Kromagg race. Now, when first encountered, our heroes mistake these malformed monsters as aliens, as they possess advanced tech such as lasers and gravity-defying aircraft, but soon discover the horrible truth about the origins of the Kromaggs. As stated by Professor Arturo, the Kromagg race are as much native to the Earth as humans are. They are simply from an alternate dimension in which Homo sapiens never became the dominant life form on Earth. The Kromaggs are an advanced form of ape-like hominids that wiped out early human ancestors and went on to develop a technologically advanced society that completely took over their homeworld, known as Kromagg Prime. Kromaggs developed a sliding technology that allowed them to travel between dimensions, much like Quinn and his companions. However, with each universe the Kromaggs landed in, they were shocked and dismayed that almost all of these parallel Earths were dominated by Homo sapiens. The Kromaggs were treated with revulsion and fear that led them to becoming an aggressive and expansionist empire of conquerors. The Kromaggs formed a diabolical religious fervor to eliminate the Homo sapiens species, as they see themselves as the true inheritors of the Earth in any and all dimensions. Already enthralled with the series up until that point, the addition of the Kromaggs as the main villains in the Sliders lore made me fall in love with the series that much more. I found them to be unique in the annals of sci-fi villains. They are threatening, malicious, and cold, and not to mention they occupy a status in which very few villains, sci-fi or otherwise, rarely manage to attain. Namely, they actually win in the end. Now, it's revealed at the beginning of Season 4 that the Kromaggs have invaded and taken over Earth Prime, the home dimension of our original 4 Sliders. The series ends on a somber cliffhanger with our heroes left defeated and broken, their future bleak and very uncertain. Arguably the most obscure entry on this list, the television show Prey, which premiered in mid-January of 1998, only lasted about 13 episodes before it was cancelled due to low ratings. The premise of the series was quite fascinating, namely that a more advanced species of human had slowly evolved in the shadow of Homo sapiens and were now poised to take over the Earth. Dubbed as Homo Dominant, these extraordinarily unique antagonists were described in the show as, quote, more human than human. Homo Dominant evolved as a result of climate shift over the past few thousand years, and listen, I'm not gonna tell you again. Knock it off. I'm trying to record a video. Jesus Christ. Sorry, back on topic, moving on. Homo Dominant has evolved to be superior to modern day humans in almost every way. They are stronger, faster, and more intelligent. They possess telepathy, precognition, and even limited forms of telekinesis. However, most disturbingly of all, they are born with an ingrained predatory nature to destroy their competition, which is namely us. Just as survival of the fittest dictates, dominants see it as their natural edict to wipe out Homo sapiens as any dominant species would their weaker rivals. Now this is manifested in the form of history's most vile and vicious serial killers and madmen. The show postulates that psychopaths aren't mentally ill at all. They are just members of a more evolved human species. Throughout the show's short run, it's revealed that the secret war between Homo Dominant and Homo sapiens is a complicated one. Not all dominants are merciless killers, and that some wish to coexist with sapiens in peace. Likewise, some humans wish to mutate into dominates for their power and are actively helping the more evolved humans in engineering a global apocalypse to wipe out the majority of the sapient species. You can tell that there's something about the concept of more evolved human species in our midst that really fascinates me, and I found the premise of Prey to be extremely creative in its rendering. If you haven't heard of the series, I speculate that many of you haven't, I would encourage you to try to check it out. I think some people have actually uploaded the entire series to YouTube. It's a forgotten gem to be sure. Continuing with obscure sci-fi shows from the 90s, for number 7 on our list, we have our first true blue alien species. Now, while the Borg is a hodgepodge of several alien species, including humans, the Gua is a secret invading army that act mainly as infiltrators. Now, in the late 90s, the Sci-Fi Channel was looking to boost its numbers with a slate of original programming. It was a golden era of creativity that gave us some of the best concepts and stories that were ever conceived, in my opinion. Enter Francis Ford Coppola and a writer named Chris Brancato, who came up with an intriguing premise that involves conspiracy, alien invasion, and the prophecies of Nostradamus as a springboard. Cade Foster is a reformed felon and master thief who has turned his life around, now working for a prestigious security firm. Cade is then thrust into an unimaginable nightmare as his life is slowly torn to shreds by an unknown cabal. He is terminated from his job, all his money and assets are stolen, and he is framed for his wife's gruesome murder. Cade soon discovers that he is an unwilling participant in a monstrous experiment carried out by a shadowy alien race known as the Gua. Now, the Gua are an ancient intergalactic species that seek to subjugate other life forms to add to their expansionist empire. Now, the Gua were once themselves conquered by another alien race, but retaliated and triumphed over their oppressors. They took the name the Gua, which means the power to overcome, in a bid to never be victims again, and started to overtake other species in the galaxy. They set their sights on Earth sometime in the ancient past, and used a rather unique form of transportation. Now, rather than fancy spaceships or faster-than-light travel, these aliens opted to transfer their consciousness into small metallic orbs that would possess the body of a host if touched. The orbs were loaded en masse onto hollow artificial asteroids that would travel the bowels of the universe, landing on several habitable planets the Gua had pre-selected for takeover. With his psychic gift of precognition, the French mystic Michel de Nostradame foretold the destruction of Earth in 3 waves by the aforementioned alien species. Now, the first wave is infiltration, the second invasion, and the third is annihilation. In the present day, the Gua are in the midst of the first wave and are currently running a gambit of experiments all over the globe in order to test humanity's ability to actually fight back. In Cade's case, the Gua are testing these supposed 117 human archetypes, Cade being dubbed Subject 117. The goal in all these experiments is to drive the test subject incurably insane. Now, Cade breaks free of the experiment and begins to actively hunt down the aliens using a hidden book of the prophecies of Nostradamus. Now, the Gua proved to be exceptionally difficult opponents as their human-engineered bodies, known as husks, are spliced with Gua DNA to make them far stronger and resilient than a normal human otherwise would be. However, this tactic to hide the Gua amongst the human population is a double-edged sword. Because they are now in human bodies, the Gua are now subject to human weaknesses. They find themselves far more susceptible to human emotions such as jealousy, paranoia, and pride. Many of them find themselves particularly vulnerable to human sexuality and the feelings that go with it. The Gua are now flushed with infighting as many of them begin to turn on each other, something that Cade uses to his full advantage. Now, at the end of the series, it's the human frailties in which the Gua have sheathed themselves in that proves to be their ultimate undoing. First Wave brought a fresh new take on the whole alien invasion genre, presenting an invading species in a way that was never seen before. In many fictional media, a conquering alien race often uses humanity's inherent weaknesses to cripple us. In First Wave, that plot point is really turned on its ear, and our protagonist uses those exact same weaknesses as weapons against his enemies. In First Wave, it's ironically mankind's weaknesses that prove to be its ultimate salvation. Here we find ourselves going from the obscure to the exceptionally well-known. While not many people have ever heard of the Dominants, the Kromaggs, or the Gua, everyone at some point in his or her life has heard the term Decepticon. Hailing from the planet Cybertron, both the Decepticons and their rivals, the Autobots, are from an unnamed race of cybernetic organisms that were originally created by a Lovecraftian race of squid-like beings known as the Quintessence. Originally created as slave labor, these cybernetic organisms developed complex self-awareness and eventually rebelled against the Quintessence and drove them off Cybertron. After several millions of years, these cybernetic organisms split into 2 distinct factions, one altruistic and heroic, known as the Autobots, and the other, a warlike contingent of conquerors. These were the Decepticons. The 2 sides went to war that eventually spilled over onto Earth over the course of millions of years. The Decepticons and the Autobots, now collectively known as the Transformers, could take on a variety of forms and incarnations. The Decepticons themselves falling into several subcategories, including the Constructicons, the Insecticons, the Combaticons, the Predacons, and many, many others. Over the years, they have been led by a few different warlords, the most prominent and famous being that of the legendary Megatron. What else really needs to be said about the Decepticons? They're essentially giant robots that can turn themselves into a variety of different vehicles, weapons, and other assorted objects. They're awesome, they're badass, and they feed every young boy's fantasies of everything just plain cool.